What is the one feature that they removed from Apex that you miss the most? If you ask any player that has been around for some time, most of them will confidently say punch boosting. This old feature allowed the player to traverse the map so much quicker by simply punching the ground as they were sliding down a slope. Every time you punched the ground, it would add more momentum to your slide, which actually could stack to some insanely high speeds as well. And this feature single-handedly made Stormpoint playable, but sadly Respawn considered it a bug or exploit, and it was promptly removed with Season 12. But all things considered, that was pretty recent, so let's talk about a few beloved features from the very start of the game that any Apex OGs are sure to be missing. For example, way before finishers would reset your shield by default, the ability to get a reset from a finisher was part of a perk called Executioner, which was unlocked by equipping a golden armor. So you know, the golden armors were all in all pretty useless. But the level 4 armor wasn't the only thing that had a different perk back then. First off, the gold backpack used to increase your heal speed by 50%, which allowed you to pop a battery in 2.5 seconds. This was perfect for kill farmers back in the day, since it meant that they could stay full health practically forever. Secondly, the gold knockdown was a lot different back then too, giving you a self-revive ability when you were downed. Around the start of the game, pulling off a self-revive would take about 5 seconds and bring you back to low life, albeit with low health, even if your teammates were dead, meaning all 3 of you could be knocked, but you would still be in the game. This could be used to come back in some otherwise considered lost games, but most notably let players rack up placement points by simply staying alive in the final circles without even attempting a respawn. The fast heal perk was moved from the backpack to the golden armor in Season 3 and eventually removed in Season 5, and despite tons of controversies whether it should stay in the game or not, the self-revive remained in Apex until it was finally removed with Season 14. Something else that was in the game super early, while not necessarily being a standalone feature, is something I want to bring up for nostalgia's sake. Around the start of the game, there was no additional category for marksman rifles, and sniper ammo had never been heard of. The long-range rifles, that being the longbow, the triple take, and of course the G7 Scout, used heavy ammo, energy ammo, and light ammo respectively, and they could all be equipped with sniper scopes. Before the 10x sniper scope on the Scout was a sight to be seen. I still remember some Bangalore setting up on god spots, smoking themselves off, and just wreaking havoc on the entire lobby. Eventually, the Scout could no longer be equipped with sniper scopes in Season 4 because it was converted to an assault rifle. Yep, you heard me right. And the triple take stopped having this feature when it was converted to a marksman rifle in Season 9. Speaking of guns equipping scopes that don't make sense, around the start of the game, you could also equip what we now call the marksman scopes, that being the 2-4x or the 3x Ranger, to the alternator and to the R99, which, looking back at it, was really weird. They could also take barrel stabilizers, and in the case of the R99, it almost acted like a higher DPS version of the R301. But speaking of the R99, something we haven't seen in quite a while now is pay-to-win iron sights. Pay-to-win skins, or I guess more commonly known as pay-to-win iron sights, are a set of skins or iron sights with much less visual clutter than the factory issue weapon skins, giving the user a noticeable advantage off drop. Some of the most well-known examples being the R99 reactive skin, the Wingman Death Ray, and the Peacekeeper Lone Star. While there hasn't been an official statement on pay-to-win skins moving forward just yet, the last time we really saw a good pay-to-win skin being added to the game was with the Flatline Splash Zone skin on March 23rd, 2023, where there literally weren't any iron sights obstructing the view at all. But this was obviously a bug, and Respawn promptly ended up fixing their mistake. So before that, the last time a pay-to-win had been addressed was when the heatsink was nerfed to be more in line with all of the other Flatline skins all the way back in September 22, where Respawn firmly set their foot down on pay-to-win skins in their game. While they only seem to apply this pay-to-win fix to the heatsink, which due to being a reactive weapon skin was only available by maxing out the battle pass that you can't get anymore, other than the Splash Zone, we haven't seen any pay-to-win skins being released ever since, or even fixed. And something else that we all have been missing is of course the Solos mode. With the Iron Crown collection event during Season 2 in 2019, Respawn also released Solos. This limited time mode would allow the player to queue up into a game of Apex with 61-man squads. Despite its chaotic nature, the mode was beloved by the Sweats and most of the vocal player base around the time, and after eventually leaving the rotation with the end of the game mode, the community constantly kept pleading and begging for Respawn to bring the mode back, only for the developers to eventually make a statement about the limited time mode about a year later, stating that solos negatively impacted new player retention. And though we didn't really hear anything after that, but the developers broke their silence regarding the chance of a solos mod appearing this very year, where in a Q&A session they firmly stated that they are not going to add any solo modes to Apex because it is a team game. So any of you all holding out for solos to come back, just give up at this point. Speaking of holding out, for about the first 2 years or so of Apex, users who were getting spectated would see this cool eye-looking icon in the top right of their UI, which showed the amount of enemies that were spectating them. And there was just something different about having a particularly good game and seeing the amount of spectators racking up as you continue tearing through the lobby. The adrenaline rush from knowing that they were watching your every move was exhilarating. And while the specific reason for it being removed was never actually officially stated, many assume it had to do with catching cheaters, because cheaters would simply stop cheating the second they were getting spectated. That being said, allegedly, especially around the time the spectator count had just been removed from the game, despite the counter being gone, cheaters could still see whether they were being spectated or not through their cheating tools. So this feature was really only removed for legit players. And since we haven't heard anything about this feature for years, odds are it's never coming back. Something else that's probably never coming back is of course custom reticles. Sure, we do have a version of it in the gameplay settings where we can set up our own settings using a very restricted slider, but for a brief, glorious moment, PC users were able to configure the reticles with completely free reign, leading to some either fun-looking reticles, eye-piercing colors, or even some crazy-looking patterns. And it's no surprise that this was removed at the start of 2022, but that doesn't mean that we don't really miss it. Other than that, I'm pretty sure that anyone who was around back then really missed the World's Edge train. Even though we do see a return of this train at least once a year with the occasional event like the Holiday Bash Winter Express or the recent spooky event, there was a moment in time where this train would regularly chug along World's Edge, instilling anyone brave enough to land on it with some insanely high-tier loot, as well as the ability to make a quick getaway if things got too hot. That being said, with the high-tier loot, there obviously were some risks.
You got him though.
The enemy. I'm taking damage.
Sadly, the train was stopped or crashed in Season 6, and it doesn't seem to have any return to Battle Royale in the future. While we are on the subject of spooky trains, I want to quickly mention the first Halloween event, which to many still is the best Halloween event that we have seen in Apex. The Shadowfall limited time mode around Halloween in 2019 had everyone starting the event as a normal player, but if you died, you would return to the Apex games as a shadow. These shadows had increased movement speed, they had a double jump and a much stronger melee attack, and they were supposed to band together to wipe out the remaining living players. Once there were only 10 living players remaining, they had to work together to get to an extraction point, all while fighting off the shadows in order to get a win. It's been almost 4 years since then, and we keep getting new, different versions of the Halloween event, which makes it pretty clear to me that this mode probably won't ever see a comeback. Something else that we have seen come back occasionally, but never in full swing or as part of the permanent BR rotation, is of course the old beloved Skulltown. Before it was removed in Season 5, Skulltown was the place to drop on King's Canyon. Although the loot wasn't all that great, the different levels of verticality on top of a point of interest with several loot paths converging in the middle made for some super fun early games and could turn into complete utter chaos as surrounding loot spots would later on join in the fight after the initial dust had settled. But despite being such a beloved drop spot, Respawn felt like it was time to mix things up, with the developer Chad Grenier saying that players have had thousands of matches on it, so a significant change gets him excited. Adding that despite being one of the fans of Skulltown himself, it is what's best to keep the game fresh. You know, right before blowing it up and sinking it into the ocean. He also added that if anything becomes too iconic like Skulltown did, or other points of interest in this video, odds are Respawn have their sights on it and are looking for ways to destroy what you love. The first example which comes into mind being Capital City. This beautiful city was part of the first version of World's Edge, and just like Skulltown, ended up being a central point for most of the action in the game. Not wanting to keep such an iconic part of the map, Respawn decided to blow it up, best to their abilities, by having the Harvester blow up and split the beloved Capital City down the middle. Joke's on them though, because people will keep dropping Fragment for as long as World's Edge exists. So unless you make a massive crater, people are gonna keep dropping there. And Respawn, if you're watching this, don't do it. No? Don't blow it up. Anyways, while we're on the subject of blowing things up, what about bunkers? What about loot bunkers? The loot bunkers were added to King's Canyon in Season 5, with the first bunker being accessible using a jump tower, going out to a dropship, or with some parkour skills, and landing in this hole in the side of a cliff where Skulltown used to be. For a short period after being added to the map, other than the one bunker that had been blown open, these loot bunkers were completely inaccessible, with a new bunker being able to be opened every once in a while until eventually 4 out of the 5 bunkers could be opened. Inside of each bunker, players could find a charge tower, some high-tier loot, and a guaranteed golden weapon, specific to whichever bunker you went into, with the available weapon changing up every season. The bunkers were all eventually blown up in Season 8, along with a lot of other parts of Kings Canyon, and while they can no longer be entered, you can still see the blown-up lid of one bunker in the middle of the forest, south of artillery. Something else that seems to be gone forever has to be arenas. This, to some, beloved game mode was a staple in Apex, according to Respawn apparently, going so far as being added as a permanent mode in Season 9. In short, Arenas was a mode where 2 squads of 3 would battle each other over multiple rounds, with the objective per round being to kill everyone on the opposing team. There wasn't any respawning in this mode, but downed players could still be revived. At the start of every round, both teams started on one side each of this much smaller map with 30 seconds to purchase weapons and abilities, much like in Valorant. Respawn believed in this game mode so much so that they eventually rolled out a ranked Arenas mode in Season 10, but due to the overall lack of interest in Arenas from the general public, to the point where the mode, especially the ranked badges that you could receive from getting a good rank in it, was considered a bit of a joke, at least compared to BR, and despite being a permanent mode that Respawn seemed to put so much stock in, it ended up being removed from the game in Season 16. On the inverse, something that Respawn hasn't put a lot of stock in has to be tap strafing. And as far as movement techniques go, you can have your own opinions on tap strafing as a whole, but a large majority of the community really misses the gravity cannon tap strafes. By utilizing a very high-speed tap strafe, users could take a gravity cannon and instead of being sent in the ordinary arch, they could fly towards whatever direction that they wanted up to 180 degrees away. Just like punch boosting, this awesome feature made Stormpoint a lot more bearable to play, but it was sadly removed in September 22. But this next thing was removed quite a lot sooner than that, and that is the Select Fire Havoc. When the Havoc was first introduced all the way back in Apex's pre-season, it could initially be equipped with both the turbocharger and the Select Fire receiver. The Select Fire Havoc wasn't as you might expect, and by switching to the single fire mode, instead of firing plenty of energy bullets, the Havoc would charge up and fire one long hit scan beam. This was the first time we had seen hitscan in Apex, and in a way the Select Fire Havoc could be seen as a precursor to the first version of the charge rifle, which also used energy ammo and also obviously was hitscan. But the Select Fire hitscan feature was eventually removed from the game in Season 7 in late 2020. Another feature, or well, sort of movement technique that was removed and that's missed by many is of course the Zipline Spam. Nowadays there's a limit to how many times you can hit a zipline before falling onto the ground, but back in the day there was no limit at all, which allowed you to dance around on ziplines infinitely in order to stay alive and reach whatever destination you had in mind. The infinite zipline jumps were even abused by professional players in some endgames, where they would stay on top of a zipline for as long as possible to avoid fighting and get to the final third party to end up winning the game. In some extreme cases, users would place 2 ziplines right on top of each other, which would allow them to spam jump and attaching to the ziplines over and over and over again, which in turn would make the users impossible to hit. Sadly, this pretty fun technique was fixed in the early to mid 2020s and is definitely never coming back. But what about the third-person mode? Well, yes, you can go into third person in the firing range, and by the way, it's something that's been doable for quite some time before the current version of the firing range. It just required a bunch of roundabout steps to pull it off. But all the way back during the Grand Soiree event in January 2020, where users got to play in a bunch of really fun limited time events for a limited amount of time, there was a 2-day window where Apex could be played in third person instead. It was the same as Apex typically, but it was third person instead. Sure, there were some corner abusers, but that's just part of a third-person shooter, right? Anyway, speaking of being part of shooters, another feature we all are missing have to be the one-shot kill Karber. For a long part of its lifespan, the Karber used to have a guaranteed one-shot potential with a headshot, but after a lot of feedback from the professional and ranked community, Respawn decided to bring it down and make it a little bit more in line with the Karber that we have today, where it only one-shots enemies under a certain armor or helmet level, and then just kinda doesn't do much other than take a large chunk of health from the enemy even if there is a headshot. And this was a really controversial change. The community went so far as to call this change a mistake, and somehow even the pro community was agreeing, because they just wanted the Karber removed from competitive, or fully tuned to remove the one-shots outright, not just with certain armors. So at the end of the day, this change left nobody happy. Something else that has left nobody happy has of course been the removal of Rafe's Naruto run. Up until Season 6, Rafe had a very unique and, some dare say, cooler sprinting animation than the one she has today. At the very least, it was iconic, and it was dubbed the Naruto Run. This running animation had Rafe lean forward and keep her hands behind her as she sprinted forward to obviously decrease the air resistance and look really cool when doing it, like in the Japanese cartoons. Sadly, hitting someone running in this animation turned out to be really difficult for the average player, and as such her sprinting animation was changed to a more realistic one, which would be more in line with the rest of the characters in October 2020. And speaking about old features that we are all missing, there's of course the first few iterations of Lifeline, where she had a passive that allowed her to heal 25% faster, and by reviving teammates she would receive a shield which protected her and her teammates that she was reviving. This shield ended up seeing a lot of different smaller changes before being completely scrapped in Season 9, but Lifeline as a whole has seen a very interesting slide from being one of the strongest legends in the game to becoming what she is today. And if you are interested in learning how this all happened, you should definitely check out the video on the screen. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Peace out.